The usual readings, especially for the epistle, are changed on occasion in our church. And this Sunday morning, the church gives us from the apostolic writings of St. Paul, one of the letters which he wrote to his disciple and spiritual child, whose name was Timothy, whose memory we celebrate and the church recalls on a day like this. Those of you who followed along in the epistle reading may have noticed that St. Paul says to Timothy, "Do not be afraid because of your youth." But he commands him to teach and to preach. He admonishes him to study the Scripture and to share the Scripture and the meaning of the Scripture with the congregations and the people. It often comes within our own communities, and even in this parish, that we're afraid of the youth, and we're afraid of the changes which they bring. We're afraid of new ideas because we try to hold on to the past. Many times we hold on to the past and we do things not because of why we do them with knowledge. We do things because that's the way it is. That's how I saw it done. That's how it was taught to me. In doing these things, we don't always do things that are right. There is that wonderful story about a young woman who watched her grandmother, and every time the grandmother brought the roast to the house and prepared it for cooking, she always took that sharp knife and cut off just a portion at the end. Each and every time the grandmother would prepare the roast, she followed the same practice. One day the young girl asked her mother, "Why does grandmother do that? Why do we have this practice and this tradition?" Because the mother had also incorporated that into her own life. And one day they asked the grandmother, "Why is it every time that you get ready to cook the roast, you cut off just a small portion and put it to the side? Is there meaning in that?" She says, "It's very simple. The roast would not fit into the pan that I had. And every time I would have to slice off a small piece of the meat." You see, sometimes we do things in life as people and especially as Christians without asking the question, why? And it is the youth who brings that fresh air and that breath of life into our congregations at times. And they ask us why. They ask us how, and they ask us when. They're not satisfied with a faith and a tradition that is just passed down from one to the next. Not only are they not satisfied and pleased, I might dare say that God is also not satisfied and pleased. For Jesus Christ tells us again through the writings of St. Paul in another letter to Timothy, or another portion in the letter to Timothy, God desires that we should all be saved and we should all come to the knowledge of His truth. Knowledge is really important for the Christian and the human being. For God calls us to be knowledgeable about our faith and our lives, who we are as people, who we are as Christians. And He sends young people to come and to challenge us, and at times to bring change in our lives, even into our communities and our services. And change is not always bad. Change causes us to think. Change challenges us. It asks us to ask those questions, why and how and when, and even who we are as people. Too often we become complacent in our lives and don't want to change. We don't want to move, we don't want to get out of the chair. And yet God demands that and requires that from each and every one of us. And He challenges you and me on this day and on every day not to be afraid of the youth. And He demands from the young people of this congregation and our world to bring change and to challenge us. Those of you who lived during the time of the Vietnam War, remember that it was the young people who rose up in this land and challenged us and questioned. And they asked why. And it is the young people of this community and this parish that are going to have to work with Father Athanasios and Father Samson to challenge you and to bring you into change, so that the community continues to move forward and overcome its challenges and its difficulties. But you may ask your questions, do we trust the young? Do we trust new ideas? And I tell you, it is time for a breath of fresh air to sweep not only into the church and into the congregation, but into the entire world. Not to bring new ideas, but to refresh us and to give us life once again, because that's what Jesus Christ did. He came into a world which was dead with sin, and He brought life. For He challenged the community, and He was indeed a young man, and His followers, the original ones, were a band of young men as well, and young women who later joined them and became His disciples and His followers. That youth, that vigor, that life is what we need. And you have to ask yourselves as people and as Christians, are we ready to take those steps? Are we ready to move forward? Are we ready to allow life and fresh air to come into our community once again? Do we dare challenge ways of the past? I often laugh when I'm told about those who built this church, because it seems every old family that is from Tarpon built this church. And I often ask people, were your parents bricklayers since they built the church? But the church is built upon the faith and the rock and the confession of Peter, the truth of Jesus Christ. It doesn't belong to me and it doesn't belong to you. It's the church of God, named for St. Nicholas, but part of the body of Jesus Christ in this world. And it is this church which must bring that knowledge and that truth to the community at large. Don't be afraid of young people. Let them challenge you and listen to them, because at times they speak with an innocence. Their spirit is ingenuous. Their questions are real. And after all, there is that expression in Greek that from the crazy person and the child, you learn the truth. Let us learn to look and find the truth, whether it be from young people or young-hearted people, and let this community move forward in truth and in faith for the glory of Jesus Christ.